welcome to Books and Brews Light number 11. And this time, I believe I got it right, despite never knowing where I am in this. So today we have Kimberly J. Ward with a very exciting story. And Kimberly, would you like to give an introduction of who you are?
Super, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me here today. As she said, my name is Kimberly, and I am a writer, I am a gardener, I'm a mom, I'm an oyster farmer, and occasionally...
I love oysters.
Oh, well, we have oysters for you up here in Massachusetts. And occasionally I'm a sailor. And I have, within the past year, published my very first book. It's called Crew of Three, my husband, my daughter, and me, and how bold dreams and detailed plans launched our family sailing adventure. And it is the stories surrounding the planning on going sailing. And it includes...
just the planning.
Well, it includes the first 4 months aboard, which I kind of still consider the planning.
Okay.
So it's the planning and there. So I bring in some sailing in those chapters, but it's not a, we went here, we did this. It is more of, if you have a bold dream, how do you plan for it and how do you go for it?
Fantastic. Before we dig into that, I would like to ask people to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment, perhaps about what drink you would choose for sailing. I keep wanting to say around the world, but it wasn't quite that.
Definitely not around the world, not for this crew.
So what did you pick to drink for a book on sailing?
What I picked was a dark and stormy. And although I thought about having one here today, still have a little bit more work to do, and I usually end up not very productive. So a dark and stormy. Rum is the currency of the Caribbean. And dark and stormy includes a ginger beer, which is a non-alcoholic soda, and Gosling's dark rum. Substitutes
Fantastic.
are not accepted.
You and I are on the same page. I have my sort of, old style pirate looking mug here.
I love it.
And I chose grog, which I don't think you can really see, but it does include crack and dark spiced rum, lime juice, and brown sugar. And actually, it's 4 parts water to 1 part each of those. And part of the reason I picked it seemed right for sailing, because what did pirates drink, or what did sailors drink? I also picked it because it's been really rainy and chilly here, and I'm freezing, and there's nothing like rum for warming you up. So
nothing like rum for warming you up. You are correct.
Right. Before you do your reading, and I've had to start writing notes down because I keep forgetting to ask people to do their reading. Before you do the reading, you were not a sailor to begin with. So what in the world inspired you to live on a boat for 2 years?
Well, I married a sailor, and it's now been almost 22 years. And so I have slowly become a sailor, but I consider sailing as sort of like an in-law, someone to get to know and to appreciate and to realize that as part of our marriage, regardless if I choose it or not.
That's great.
So sometimes sailing is a bit more like a mistress than an in-law. However, I love to travel. Both my husband and I were avid travelers prior to meeting, and we did not slow down once we met and got married and had our daughter, Allie. In fact, 3 months after our wedding, we got on a boat and we went cruising for 6 weeks up to Nova Scotia from Massachusetts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was so green that I had no idea it was even called cruising. And I was pretty much along for the ride. My husband has done a lot of solo sailing, and he just thought, hey, I have somebody who's willing to hop on board with me. So he pretty much did everything. I did not even really cook very well when we got married. I've come a long way. And although I only begrudgingly call myself a sailor, I love living on the boat. I love the small space living. I love the simplicity, sort of simplicity. I like the simplicity of no stuff.
Right.
One of the things you learn on a boat is how little you need, not how much. And so I love that part of it. I'm certainly able to handle the boat in an emergency. I know how to douse the sails. I know how to radio for help. And I know how to manage if we have a man overboard, particularly if that is my husband.
That's really important.
Very important. So as much as I may disparage my sailing abilities, I probably know more than I think I do. But I just don't consider myself a sailor. It's my passion.
Right. That's fantastic. You developed that. I like your comment about this small living. I'm kind of the same way with RVs.
Oh, yes.
And it's ironic. I mean, I've been fascinated with RVs since the time we first had one when I was maybe 9 or 10, about how efficiently they use the space. And it's kind of ironic because we live in a rather large house for just 2 people. And in fact, it's actually smaller than our previous house, which was close to 7,000 square feet for 2 people.
Wow, that's a big house.
It is, but it felt right. And part of the reason is because we both have a lot of interests. So I keep saying, I want to live in a house that is nothing but a bed and a table. And then I say, well, and the pianos, and the harps, and the saxophones, and the library. We have a very extensive library, both of us do, thousands of books each. So it's nice to be in the RV with less stuff around. But on the other hand, I know I can come back to the pianos and the harps and the saxophones and all these interests we have that just take up space. So
I'm not a purist either. We have our boat. We rented out our house when we went away for 2 years.
Okay.
When our daughter was 10, we went sailing for 2 years and sailed from Massachusetts down to Grenada and back. And we rented out our house and we came back to our house. So, and now we do, we've just started this past year, but now we do seasonal cruising. And so our boat lives in Florida and we head down after Christmas and spend 3 months, sail over to the Bahamas and come back to our home.
That sounds wonderful.
My passion is gardening. So it's not even so much about having the house and the stuff, although you can see behind me, I have an affinity for books as well. I need land. I want land.
Yeah, we are gardening more because we feel it probably will be important. But that's something I'm learning to do. So 3 years ago, I could not grow a head of lettuce. I don't think I could have grown a basil plant or a dill. And now we're growing the garden. It's not great, to be honest, but at least stuff is growing. And we're raising chickens and rabbits and sheep. And 3 years ago, I had never touched any animal but a cat or a dog. So we're on a pretty steep learning curve here. So do you have your reading ready to go?
I do. We have a passion for travel. So we talked through a dozen or dozens of adventures ever since we started dating in 2001. However, a trip on the boat had always been a nebulous someday kind of idea. How does a trip like this even work? Living on a boat, plans are primarily driven by the weather, hurricane season, prevailing winds, and currents. We talked in detail for the first time about what a trip might be within reason for us. We talked through a 1-year trip going down the East Coast from Massachusetts to Florida. From Florida, we would cross the Gulf Stream to the Bahamas, exploring a number of the 700 coral islands and 2,400 keys that make up the island nation. And then we would head back up north to Massachusetts. A 2-year trip would look the same as the 1-year trip to the Bahamas. Then, instead of retracing our steps north back home, we would head to Turks and Caicos through the Thorny Passage, along the north coast of the Dominican Republic, through the Mona Passage, where the cold Atlantic meets the much warmer Caribbean, and along Puerto Rico's south coast. We would continue through the Virgins, Spanish, US, and British, to St. Martin, and then south through the eastern Caribbean islands. After waiting out the hurricane season in Grenada, we would turn around and follow the same route back home. What about the Western Caribbean? Can we go through the Panama Canal? How do you go around the world in a boat anyway? I fired question after question at Michael, for which he mostly had ready answers. Of course, he has been reading about and studying all of this for years. He pulled out his well-worn copy of Jimmy Cornell's World Cruising Routes to illustrate many of these answers for me. I was infatuated with the idea of going through the Panama Canal and everyone becoming fluent in Spanish until, that is, I discovered that once on the Pacific side of the canal, it can be up to 14 days at sea before arriving in the Galapagos. And then it can be 20 or 30 more days before arriving at the French Polynesian Islands in the middle of the Pacific. Alrighty then, our crew is definitely not up for that. For the record, I'm a gardener, not a sailor, yet my inner traveler and adventurer seeker not only agreed to, but actually championed our plan to spend 2 years living aboard a sailboat. Yep, let's pack up everything, rent out our house, and move on to a 300 square foot sailboat for 2 years. And in August of 2014, on Michael's 55th birthday, our crew of 3, Michael, 10-year-old Allie, and I, did just that.
That's wonderful. That's a great start. I'm glad that you pointed out that it's not so much about the trip itself as about planning and about how do you decide you're going to do something big and then make it happen. And so I hope that anybody listening to this will go back through our videos and listen to the interview with, I can't remember her last name, Sandy Reed, I believe it is. Sandy Lynn Reed, I think is her name, who wrote The Drive-In 65. And it's a similar story.
Interesting.
Of her mother and her aunt and her cousins deciding they're going to make a drive all the way around the United States. And the dad's kind of laughing at them. And this was in 1962. They decided to do it, or 63. And so the dads were like, oh, a bunch of women can't do that. But I believe she went with her mother, her aunt, her grandmother, and several cousins. And they made it happen. They spent 2 years raising money. They found the perfect vehicle for it. They outfitted it so they could kind of live in it. It's quite an amazing story, and it reminds me of yours, or yours reminds me of hers. So how did your daughter feel about this?
Oh, she was all in. I mean, think of an 8-year-old, and she's going to get undivided attention 24/7 from both mom and dad, and go explore. I mean, she had, for a 12-year-old, when we returned home, she had an enviable passport. We had checked in and out of 16 different countries.
That's fantastic.
And she has a little adventurer's heart. In fact, she has a big adventurer's heart now. She's 20, and she is in university at University of Glasgow in Scotland.
Oh, fantastic. My
Yeah.
books are set in Scotland, so I've been there a lot. Well, I've been there 5 times, but I've spent a fair amount of time there over the last few years.
She found her people, and she loved it and still loves it. And in fact, we just got back from seeing her very first flat. We had a sleepover at her daughter's, and she got to make breakfast for us and coffee for us and show us around her city and town and campus. We hadn't been there in 2 years since we dropped her off.
Was it a full Scottish breakfast with kippers and eggs and
no, I have
oatmeal
to
with
say
brandy?
No, we're a little more traditional. We had a bit of oatmeal and bagels and cream cheese.
It was a good thing my husband and I were hiking when we were in Scotland, because they served us this massive breakfast at one of these hotels that must have had 9,000 calories in it. It was something else. So, do you happen to have a map of showing the path?
don't. I wish I did. And if you go back and you listen to that little bit that I
Mhm.
read to you, it will tell you the pieces
Right.
that we saw. So if you look in the Caribbean, we explored just about every island in the Eastern Caribbean. Um,
Okay.
from the U.S. East Coast, Florida, we went to Bahamas
Mhm.
and explored all through the Bahamas, and then from the Bahamas to Turks and Caicos, from Turks and Caicos down to the Dominican Republic, across to Puerto Rico, and then the Virgins and St. Martin, and then all the way down the Eastern Caribbean. So if anybody's interested in looking at a map, that's the course that we took.
That's fantastic. Did you get to the Florida Keys at all on this trip, or
We
was
did
that
not go all the way around to the Keys. What
okay?
happens is you have to pay attention to currents and trade winds.
Okay.
And if you go that far south and actually west, then it is much more difficult to get to the Bahamas in a sailboat.
Okay. Okay. So what were some of the highlights of this trip?
Oh, highlights. There's so many highlights. Um,
That's like
just
asking which is your favorite child, right? I guess if you only have
exactly.
one, it's a little easier.
Exactly. I was going to say, I only have one, so I got the favorite child down. Um,
Right, right.
People often asked us what was our favorite place to be. And my husband's response is generally the last place we were. We just have this knack. We love to travel. And so everywhere we've gone, you find highlights within that place. We did come up with a top 5 list, and Beckway, a little island I had never heard of. It's part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's part of that island chain. It's in the Grenadinian chain, so it's one of probably about a dozen islands, little islands down there that you've basically never heard of.
Mhm.
And much of it had to do, a lot of it had to do with the temperature of the crew. So where we each were, this is a lifestyle. It wasn't a vacation. It's a lifestyle change. And so people have good days and bad days. Maybe they had a bad night's sleep, or they're a little crabby, or maybe mom put a little more boat school homework on than the 10-year-old thought she should be doing, or something along those natures, or breakdowns. Things break on boats all the time. A lot of people have heard the term cruising is fixing your boat in exotic locations. A lot of truth to that. And
My husband used to own some boats, and he
yep,
always says, break out another 1,000, BOAT.
yep, BOAT. That's exactly true. And, so there's always something to be fixed, to be cleaned. You think about doing laundry, it's a full day sport, rather than something you just toss in and walk away from and come back and put in the dryer a couple minutes later. And
Yep.
it's, so a lot of it depends on the temperature of the crew. It also depends on the people we end up meeting in each of these anchorages. There's a whole community out there that most people who've never lived on a boat have no idea about. When we were in Grenada for the hurricane season, there were about 30 kids in our anchorage.
Wow.
A couple hundred boats and about 30 kids, and they ranged in age from 6 or 7 all the way up to 18. And it's like an old-fashioned neighborhood. They hung out together.
Mhm.
We met a lot of great people that we're still friends with today. So oftentimes the highlights
I was
include,
going to ask that if you kept in
absolutely.
touch with these people.
Oh yeah, social media makes it so much easier. Every time a hurricane hits, I'm thrilled when it's not where we are, but I'm
Right.
always worried. Right now I'm worried about all my peeps who are on the west coast of Florida, and
Mhm.
you get into cyclone season on the other side of the world, and so I
Right.
have friends in boats all over the world. It's fantastic.
I've
Last year
found
we
the
did a
same
mini
thing.
reunion. I'm sorry?
Yeah. I found the same thing with RVing,
Yeah.
that when we're out in our RV, and we bought it because of our dog. Number one, she's extremely large. She's an Irish Wolfhound, so over 100 pounds, and she's small for an Irish Wolfhound, but she's still the biggest dog most people have ever seen.
Oh.
Most hotels are not going to take her. And as she got older, she started to get very uncomfortable riding in the car, but she is comfortable riding in the RV. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure she could get up into it anymore because she's very old. But that's why we got the RV in the first place. And we just found it fantastic to go to a place, pull into the our RV slot and go to the hot tub. And we just met these neat people from all over the world. And unfortunately, we didn't take down names and information, but we had some really pleasant times. And just, I think there's a certain type who's drawn to travel.
The nomads among us, and believe it or not, our first family trip, we thought we'd have this crazy family with lots of kids, and we were blessed with one. And we said, okay, what would we do with one child that we might not do if we had 3 or 4, and travel by far top that list of what can we experience with our little crew of 3. And when our daughter was 3, we purchased an RV and we spent 5 months traveling around the United States. And so RVs and boats are extremely similar in terms of all their systems are the same, small space living, and they all live from above.
Right. Yeah. And that's why my husband is so comfortable with the RV and working everything. And I'm still like, oh my gosh, there is so much to learn just to turn on the stupid oven. I still feel lost sometimes, like, wait, remind me, how do you turn on the generator? How do you do this? What do you do with the house batteries? And to him, it's just second nature because he spent so much time on boats. So I really like the comment you made about you wanted more kids, you had one, because that's so true. I have 9 kids, and I think, 10 now with my stepdaughter, and I love having that many kids. And I think my kids love having that many kids. And my daughters love telling people I have 7 brothers because their jaws drop. And guys especially are like, I won't be trying anything on you. But, and a lot of times people will almost start excusing to me why they don't have more. And I'm like, I don't care how many you have, because it is true. There are advantages to a big family. They all have each other, but there are advantages to having just one too. You can do things like that. You can give them different things. So I think it's great to just say, we had what we had, and we're going to see the positive in whatever our family is. And unfortunately, I don't necessarily hear people just take that positive in attitude, whatever size their family is.
We wholly embrace that. It's I am a planner. You will see in the book, I am a planner. And one of the best things that I've learned in the last, probably since I started out on sailboats, is you make plans, but don't plan the outcome. And
I learned that from having 9 kids.
I'm sure.
I have a plan. Carpet gets yanked from under my feet. I make plan B. Carpet gets yanked out. Plan C. We had one day where that literally just kept happening over and over. But yeah, definitely on a sailboat. What were some of the biggest issues you ran into? I mean, any scary moments where you thought this isn't going to work at all?
Not any moments that we didn't think it was going to work. One of the things we point out, a big question people ask, oftentimes the 3 biggest questions are about firearms. And the simple answer is no, we do not carry a firearm. We were not gun people before. We were not going to become gun people. And there are all sorts of regulations. Every country is different with checking in if you have a firearm on board.
Okay.
So we didn't even go there. The second one is generally about pirates. Interestingly, though, those 2 questions were always asked of my husband, not of me. So guns and pirates. We were not in a hotbed of pirate activity, so we really didn't have many concerns. There are some, like you'll see travel notices that go through the embassies and the State Department. Within the cruising community, there are some other organizations that post where the incidents are. There were a couple of island chains that we just skipped altogether. In fact, interestingly, one of my favorite places is Bequia. That was in St. Vincent and Grenadines. There were a couple of islands we just steered away from. And St. Vincent, we just steered away from completely. Although,
was there trouble there at the time?
There was trouble there at the time. And often you'll see with like Haiti is a place where there's trouble, and Venezuela is a place where there's trouble. It's often in areas where economically they are struggling. And it's the adage of desperate times, desperate people do desperate things. Often it's not about hurting the people, it's about eating, and providing food for their families. So we just steered clear. We went to some of the places with other boats. There's some idea of safety in numbers. Oftentimes the biggest problems that you have are when at night ashore, if people are drinking, and we're traveling with a 10, 11, 12-year-old. So didn't have a lot of time like that. And it's being smart and knowing your environment and that sort of thing. We did remind my mother often that the most dangerous places we were Washington, D.C. and Miami.
That's very sad. So you were asked about guns, pirates, and what was the third thing? Hurricanes,
bad weather.
Okay.
And we remind people we're pleasure cruisers. Weather forecasting is pretty good. You can generally stay out of really bad weather if you plan ahead and are smart. It's generally when you have a schedule that you get into trouble. When you have to be someplace at a specific time, you give it up. If you have guests on board, they can either pick the date or they can pick the location. They can't pick both.
Right. That's very smart. You did a lot of other travel. Where have you done a lot of overseas travel, or more in the States, or both?
A little bit of both. The cross-country trips took us to 32 states, 17 national parks. It's 5 months is not long enough to explore our country.
No. And, I have an interesting perspective on this because my ex-husband is from Ireland. And so they can drive across their country in 4 hours, and that's on little roads where you're going, 40 miles an hour tops. Which
we just did 2 weeks ago.
That's kind of where I live. That's what the roads are like. So when his parents came to visit us, and this was back in the early 90s, we lived out in Seattle. My parents lived in Minneapolis, and they said they were going to be here 2 weeks. And they said, while we're in the States, or actually they always call it America, while we're in America, we're going to just rent a car and drive over to see Laura's parents. And it took some doing to explain to them, you can, but by the time you drive there and drive back, you've spent probably half your trip in the car. And unless you drive like I do, where I get in the car and I go 29 hours straight and don't stop. But even then, it's a long drive. And I found that people in Ireland really have this image of, you've got Dallas, Chicago, New York, Seattle, and they're all
never mind the 3,000 miles in between.
Exactly. And it was also particularly interesting because my father-in-law worked on an oil tanker, so he was a world traveler. It's not like they were, peat bog farmers who had never left the country. He had traveled the world, and he still didn't have a concept of just how big this country is.
Amen.
Yeah.
And there's so many places we'd love to go back to, but then, we start looking that we're on the downside of these things, on the travel experiences. We were able to explore Spain and even took a ferry over to Morocco to explore the markets.
Did you happen to order octopus in Spain?
We did not. We did a lot of calamari. That was kind of what my daughter lived on, was calamari there. That and limon queso.
Okay. I grew up in the military, and so when we lived in Germany, my dad did take us on a family trip around the Mediterranean and Spain and England. And I think he's pretty adventurous, with what he'll try to eat and all. He ordered octopus and it came to him with the little eyes looking at him. And even for him, that was too much. And he said, I won't be eating tonight.
I was in Hong Kong for work many years ago, but it was the year of the handover from England to China, so 1997.
Yeah, I remember that year well.
Yeah, it was quite a time to be working there, and I spent about 6 weeks there. And I remember most of the restaurants, you would go pick your dinner out of the aquarium out front, and I was almost a vegetarian. I still ate fish and seafood, but I was almost a vegetarian, and that just kind of cemented the deal. I ate a lot of rice when I was in Hong Kong.
You don't want to look your dinner in the eye before you eat it.
I did not need to know my dinner. No.
Yeah.
And now that our daughter's in Scotland, we've done a couple of great trips. We went over last year and explored Edinburgh and the Highlands of Scotland. My husband had never been to Edinburgh, and then it had been since I was in college and doing a study abroad that I had been to the Highlands. And so we did a lot of hiking. Our daughter's very into hiking, as are we. And so we did a lot of hiking in the Highlands. And then this year we chose Ireland as our trip. And,
fantastic.
We're looking at it. We're like, well, we definitely have 2 more trips over there. I'm not sure my daughter's coming home. I think she really loves it in Scotland. And
especially if she meets someone in college and gets married there.
Yep, one never knows.
Right.
And she's in a science degree. She's molecular and cellular biology. And so
oh, wow.
She has a lot of schooling left.
Mm-hmm.
And our only saving grace is that all the genetics and kind of the heartbeat of that entire industry is in Boston. But I honestly don't see her coming back and living in the States. She's just very happy.
Right.
Scotland
is a wonderful place. We had so much fun there. So you might enjoy my books because they're set in Scotland, and much of the scenes are set in Scotland. And so we tried to go to every single place. We went to Inverness. We went hiking in the hills to find out what is it to hike in the hills there.
Yes. Hill walking, they call it, really understandably.
Yeah. It's fantastic. So where can people find you online?
They can find me. My book is available at Amazon. It's also available anywhere books are sold. You can go into a Barnes & Noble or your local. What I love is your local indie bookstore also carries it. But of course, a large percentage of books are purchased on Amazon, and I am available there. I have both a paperback and an ebook right now, and I'm in the process of recording my audiobook and learning how to edit and produce it myself. So stay tuned. On my website, which is KimberlyJWardWriter.com. If you join my email list, I will be providing a copy of my audiobook to all of my supporters.
That's great. So they just have to sign up at your site and they'll get a free audiobook?
Yep. Read by yours truly.
You'll have another subscriber within minutes of this ending.
Fabulous. I love that.
That's great. Yeah. Is the audiobook done already? You're still working on it.
The recording is done. I am finding that the editing is quite slow and tedious. So I had a very ambitious schedule for myself, and that did not pan out. So now I am just saying soon.
Very soon.
Very soon.
Yeah. You can find me at lauravosica.com, V as in Victor, O-S-I-K-A. You can find me at booksandbrews.net, and you can find our sponsor, Gabriel's Horn, at gabrielshornpress.com. We are still accepting submissions of poetry for our next 2 anthologies, and those submissions close in about 3 weeks. So hurry and get your poems in. We're also looking for our featured poet for these 2 volumes. Your name will be on the front cover and lights, and it'll be exciting. if I can figure out how to make a book light up, I don't know. But, and I think you can find me, well, I know you can find me on all the social medias too, but it would take way too long to list all of those. So look at our websites and you'll probably find our social media. So thank you for being on the program. Cheers.
Thanks so much for having me.